When you choose silence, it's often mistaken as weakness. People might think you're retreating, avoiding confrontation, or lacking courage. But in reality, silence, intentional, composed silence, is one of the most precise emotional tools you have. It's the mark of someone who no longer needs to yell to be heard or beg to be seen. You're not choosing silence because you're out of words. You're choosing it because you've said enough. You've realized that repeating yourself doesn't create understanding. It creates frustration. So instead, you choose presence without performance. You choose to remove your energy from the chaos. It takes emotional intelligence to know when to speak and when to fall silent. Silence in this context is not passivity, it's power under control. You're not lashing out. You're not trying to control the other person. You're simply removing yourself from a dynamic that no longer respects your voice. That's precision. That's self-respect in motion. See, when someone disrespects you, your silence becomes a line in the sand. It says, I'm no longer going to participate in conversations where I have to fight to be treated with dignity. You don't owe endless explanations to someone who has already shown you they're not listening, and you certainly don't owe your peace to someone who continues to disturb it. The beauty of emotional precision is that it allows you to protect your energy without making a scene. You don't need to post cryptic messages online. You don't need to give them a piece of your mind. All you need to do is step back, stop engaging, and allow your actions to reflect your worth. That is a far more powerful statement than any emotionally charged words you might say in the heat of the moment. This level of self-control isn't cold, it's wise. You're showing yourself, not just the other person, that you're done explaining what should have been obvious from the start. You don't need them to validate your pain. You need to validate your own boundaries. You don't need closure in the form of a perfect conversation. You need peace in the form of a quiet exit. So the next time someone tries to push your buttons or draw you into a fight, remember this: silence is not weakness. It's emotional precision. It's the discipline of someone who knows their value and refuses to argue for it. It's the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. You're not backing down. You're stepping into your strength. When a man starts to feel your absence, it hits differently than your words ever could. Words can be debated, deflected, or dismissed, but silence leaves nothing to argue with. When you stop speaking, stop reaching out, stop trying to fix what's broken, he's left with something far more powerful than your frustration. He's left with the void. And it's in that space that real realization begins to take shape. He doesn't feel the weight of your message when you're constantly reminding him of how he hurt you. He doesn't take accountability while you're still cushioning the blow with your presence. But when you disappear, when your energy, your support, your conversation, your laughter suddenly stop showing up, he's no longer just hearing silence. He's feeling the absence of you. Most people underestimate the value of what they bring to someone's life. You think you have to speak more, do more, prove more, but often, it's the loss of your presence that shows a man exactly what he had. It's the absence of your attention that creates the emotional space for him to reflect on what he may have taken for granted. And when that space grows wide enough, it becomes impossible to ignore. That's when regret shows up. Not when you're chasing answers, not when you're begging to be understood, but when you go quiet, not as a strategy, but as a statement of self-worth. He begins to feel your silence, not as neglect, but as the consequence of his own actions. It stings not because you're punishing him, but because he finally has to sit with himself. Think about how relationships unfold. We often think if we just say the right thing, we'll change someone. But emotional impact doesn't always come from what we say. It comes from what they start to miss. They start to notice how their life is quieter now, how the text messages don't light up, how the calls don't come through, how the emotional oxygen you provided is gone. That's when it hits. Your silence becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, he sees who he was when he had you, and who he became when he lost you. He begins to reflect not just on what he did, but on what he didn't do. The gestures he didn't make, the words he didn't say, the times he didn't show up, and all that noise he ignored before, now it echoes inside him. So remember, silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. And when he feels that truth without your voice softening it, without your presence rescuing him from it, regret is often the only thing left in the room. Explaining yourself to someone who isn't really listening is like shouting into the wind. Your words disappear before they even land. No matter how carefully you choose your tone, how thoroughly you break down your feelings, or how honest you try to be. If the other person isn't truly receptive, none of it matters. You're pouring emotional energy into a space that doesn't have the capacity or the willingness to hold it. That's exhausting, and it teaches you something vital. Not everyone deserves access to your vulnerability. There comes a point where you have to stop trying to convince someone of your worth. You have to stop trying to justify why their behavior hurt you, why you needed more, why you felt let down. Because if they cared, truly cared, they wouldn't need a full breakdown to understand the basics of human respect. Empathy doesn't require a script. Effort doesn't need a reminder. The painful truth is, someone who really wants to understand you doesn't need you to over-explain. They listen when you speak the first time. They care enough to read between the lines, and even when they fall short, they try again. They show you, not through elaborate words, but through changed behavior, that your feelings are important to them. That's what it means to be met where you are. But when you're constantly explaining yourself to someone who already knows how they're affecting you, and chooses to keep doing it anyway, you're not in a conversation. You're in a performance. And performances are exhausting, because deep down, you're not talking to resolve anything. You're trying to rescue the connection. You're hoping that if you just say the right thing in the right way, they'll finally get it and change. That moment rarely comes, not because you didn't communicate well, but because they weren't invested in changing. And sometimes the best way to teach someone the value of your voice is to stop using it altogether. When you go quiet, not in anger, but in strength, you remove the emotional cushion that's been shielding them from accountability. That silence becomes their only mirror. It forces them to see themselves without your interpretation, without your explanations, without your emotional labor. And in that space, they either confront the truth or continue to live in denial. But at least you're no longer stuck carrying both sides of the emotional equation. You don't owe endless clarification to someone who never gave you clarity in return. You don't have to bleed words to earn basic consideration. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to say nothing. Let your silence be the lesson they refuse to learn through your words. Silence has a unique way of creating space that words can sometimes overcrowd. When you stop responding, stop explaining, and stop trying to force understanding, you create an emotional pause. And in that pause, the other person is left alone with their thoughts, their actions, and most importantly, their consequences. That's where real reflection begins. When you're always filling the silence with explanations or emotional reactions, the other person doesn't have to sit with themselves. They can focus on your tone, your frustration, your delivery. They can deflect the real issue by criticizing how you said something instead of what you said. But when you go quiet, there's nothing to deflect, no argument to pick apart, no tone to critique, just a stillness that leaves them face to face with their own behavior. Silence doesn't provoke defensiveness. It invites introspection. It puts a spotlight on their choices without the noise of your reaction to distract them. If someone has hurt you, disrespected you, or taken you for granted, and you keep engaging, they stay emotionally busy with your response. But once you remove your voice, they're left to process the echo of what they did without your interpretation of it. That's when it starts to sink in. This isn't about manipulation. It's not the silent treatment designed to guilt or punish. It's a healthy boundary. It's stepping away so you're no longer playing referee in a game they created. Your silence says, I've said what I needed to say. Now it's up to you to figure out what that means to you. That's powerful because it places the responsibility of growth and awareness back where it belongs. In that space, they might start asking themselves questions they never considered before. Why did she stop talking? Was I really listening or just defending myself? Did I actually show her that I cared? Or just expect her to keep showing up? Those internal questions are far more transformative than any external lecture. And if they never ask themselves those questions, if they stay the same, that tells you everything you need to know. That silence revealed what words never could, their capacity for accountability, or lack of it. Reflection requires space. People grow when there's room to think, feel, and realize, not when they're being spoken at, argued with, or constantly responded to. So when you go quiet, you're not giving up. You're giving them the chance to do what they couldn't do while you were talking. Think for themselves. Silence is the invitation for self-awareness. And if someone truly values you, they will use that silence as a mirror, not a reason to move further away. If they don't, your silence did exactly what it needed to do. It protected your peace and revealed their truth. You cannot be pursued while you're still doing the chasing. As long as you're reaching out, initiating conversations, seeking clarity, or trying to fix the distance, the other person doesn't feel the need to move toward you. They don't feel the gap because you keep closing it for them. You think you're showing love or being the bigger person, but what you're actually doing is removing the opportunity for them to realize what life looks like without your effort. People don't appreciate presence when it's constantly available, especially if they've started to take that presence for granted. When you're always there, always initiating, always filling in the gaps, they start to assume you always will be. But the moment you stop, the moment you pull your energy back and stop reaching for them, that's when the emotional landscape changes. That's when they either feel your absence and step forward, or they stay still, revealing just how little they were actually investing. Pulling back isn't about playing games. It's about restoring balance. When one person carries the weight of connection, it creates a dynamic where effort is no longer shared. You teach someone how to treat you by what you tolerate. So if you're always available, always forgiving, always pushing for progress, even when they're indifferent, they'll believe you need them more than they value you. And as painful as that is, it's not their fault. It's the message your actions have reinforced. The antidote is not to force them to chase you. It's simply to stop chasing. To stop filling in the silence. To stop being the emotional leader of a relationship that's supposed to be mutual. When you do that, when you step back with grace and self-respect, it creates a space where they have to make a choice. Step into the space and meet you halfway, or stay where they are and let the distance grow. And in that choice, you get your clarity. When someone truly values you, your absence will feel uncomfortable. They'll notice the silence, they'll sense the shift, and they'll be drawn to reconnect. Not out of guilt, but out of recognition. Recognition that the connection required more from them. That your effort wasn't a given, it was a gift. And if they let that gift slip through their fingers, they have to work to earn it back. But if they don't respond, if your silence is met with more silence, then you've learned something equally valuable, who they are when you're no longer doing all the work. That's not a loss, that's a redirection. A reality check that allows you to reinvest your energy into someone who doesn't need to be reminded of your worth. Let go of the chase, because the right person will always meet you where effort is mutual, not where it's one-sided. Silence reveals more than any question or argument ever could. When you stop talking, when you stop explaining, when you stop giving them access to your emotions, you create a space that becomes incredibly revealing. You no longer have to ask, does he care? Or will he show up if I stop trying? Because your silence will answer those questions for you. Clearly and often painfully. When someone is invested in you, your silence doesn't go unnoticed. It hits differently. They feel the shift, they sense the withdrawal, and they do something about it. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not right away, but they step forward, they reach out, they try. Not because you forced them to, but because your absence illuminated what your presence was doing all along, supporting, nurturing, showing up. But when someone is not emotionally available, not truly invested, or simply not serious about you, your silence exposes that. They don't step up. They fade, delay, or disappear. And instead of fighting harder to keep them, you can finally see the truth they were never going to say out loud. You don't have to beg someone to show their true colors. Just get quiet. Your silence becomes a stage where their intentions, their priorities, and their feelings play out. Without you having to lift a finger. It's not manipulation, it's alignment. You're allowing the connection to reveal itself naturally, without you constantly carrying the weight of proving your worth. Many people keep talking because they're afraid of what silence might uncover. They're afraid that if they stop reaching out, they'll lose the person. But here's the thing. If your silence causes someone to leave, they were already on their way out. You just stopped distracting them from it. And that's not a loss. That's a blessing in disguise. Because you don't want someone who only stays when you're chasing them. You want someone who stays because they want to, not because you beg them to. Silence isn't a punishment. It's an invitation for them to step up or step out, for them to take responsibility or make their disinterest known. And whatever their choice is, you're better off knowing the truth than living in a fantasy that only exists because you never stop talking long enough to see it. When you go quiet, you gain clarity. You remove the noise, the back and forth, the emotional drama, and what's left is the truth. Who they are, what they feel, what they're willing to do without being prompted. That's the power of silence. It doesn't push people away. It reveals who was never really there to begin with. When you walk away without a dramatic exit, without slamming doors or sending angry messages, it sends a message louder than any argument ever could. Silence is its own kind of closure, and it's often the most powerful kind. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not seeking revenge or hoping they feel guilty. You're simply choosing peace. You're making a decision to no longer invest in a place where your value wasn't recognized. And that quiet walk away, that's what haunts them, because they expected noise. They expected resistance. They expected you to make it hard for them to leave or to keep showing up even after they let you down. But when you choose stillness over chaos and calm over conflict, you strip them of the control they once had. You take away the emotional fuel that allowed them to feel powerful in your pain. They can't spin the narrative. They can't blame your reaction. All they're left with is the silence and the realization that they caused it. A quiet departure unsettles people because it's grounded in clarity. You're not leaving in the heat of emotion. You're leaving because you've reached the truth. They're not showing up for you the way you deserve. And instead of trying to convince them to treat you better, you've decided to stop asking altogether. That level of emotional control is rare and unforgettable. They might not say anything right away. They might pretend they're unbothered, but trust this. They notice the quiet, the lack of your presence, the absence of your energy. It echoes, it lingers. It forces them to wonder what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and whether or not they lost something irreplaceable. And they don't get to know. That's the consequence of ignoring your voice when you are still speaking. Walking away in silence doesn't mean you're cold or heartless. It means you're wise enough to stop wasting words where they've fallen on deaf ears. It means you love yourself enough to stop begging for what should have been freely given. Respect, effort, care. It means you're letting your boundaries speak louder than your emotions ever could. And what's most haunting to them isn't just your absence. It's the fact that you didn't need a final word. You didn't need them to understand in order to move on. You created your own closure. That's the moment they realize they underestimated you. That the version of you who once stayed, pleaded, or over-explained is gone. And what's left is someone who values their peace more than a connection built on inconsistency. So when you walk away quietly, you're not being passive, you're being precise. You're giving them the greatest wake-up call of all, the sound of a door closing, softly but for good. Regret rarely shows up in the moment they take you for granted. It arrives in the silence after you leave. At first, they might feel relief. They might think your absence is temporary, that you'll reach out eventually like you always did. But when the silence stretches longer than they expected, when they realize you're not chasing, not explaining, not waiting anymore, that's when regret begins to bloom. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in during quiet moments. When they scroll through their phone and notice there are no new messages from you. When something reminds them of you, a song, a place, a routine, and you're not there to share it. That's when they start replaying everything they once dismissed. The way you were always there. The way you cared even when they didn't match your energy. The way you tried to fix things when they were too indifferent to even notice there was a problem. They remember the things you said, the subtle warnings you gave when you felt unseen, the moments you reached out one last time hoping for change. And now, in the silence you left behind, they finally hear those words. But too late to respond. That's what makes regret so sharp. Not just the loss, but the awareness that they had every opportunity to do better, and they chose not to. They remember the effort they didn't return, the vulnerability they brushed off, the way they assumed your love would always be there. no matter how carelessly they treated it. Now that love is gone, and it's not anger or bitterness they feel. It's the slow, cold realization that they lost something real, something they didn't respect enough to hold on to. And here's the most haunting part. They realize the silence means you're done, not emotionally reactive, not waiting in the background, not trying to teach them anymore. You've moved into acceptance, and that's the final stage. There's nothing louder than the silence of someone who used to explain and now just observes. Someone who used to ask for more and now simply walks away. That silence says, I'm not angry, I'm just done. That's when they start to want you back. Not out of love, but out of discomfort. Because regret isn't about suddenly realizing how much they love you. It's about realizing how much easier life was when you were there to fill in the emotional blanks. It's about missing the comfort, the support, the way you gave them grace, even when they didn't deserve it. But now it's too late, because silence, when chosen from self-respect, is final. It's not a pause, it's not a tactic, it's a closing chapter. And by the time regret arrives, you've already turned the page. There is a distinct kind of power in emotional detachment. Not the kind that makes you cold or unfeeling, but the kind that comes from choosing not to be controlled by another person's behavior. When you become emotionally detached, you stop handing over the remote control of your peace to someone who doesn't know how to care for it. You stop allowing their words, silence, attention, or lack of it to dictate your mood or self-worth. That's not indifference, that's wisdom. When you reach this place of calm separation, you're no longer reacting out of desperation or fear. You're not checking your phone obsessively, trying to decode mixed signals, or sacrificing your own well-being for temporary validation. You become grounded, still, clear. And from that clarity, you stop operating from a place of need and start operating from a place of self-trust. You recognize that your peace is not a reward someone else gives you. It's a standard you set for yourself. This shift is subtle, but deeply transformative, because suddenly they lose the ability to control you with inconsistency. Their hot and cold behavior doesn't throw you off balance anymore. You don't chase, you don't over-explain, you don't plead, you simply observe. You see things for what they are, not what you wish they could be. You stop trying to rewrite the story and start reading the one they're actually showing you, loud and clear. And the more detached you become from their approval, the more magnetic your energy becomes. Not because you're trying to manipulate or play games, but because you've centered yourself in your own value. You're no longer responding emotionally to every push or pull. You've reclaimed your emotional real estate and put up healthy boundaries, which is incredibly attractive to someone used to having control. Here's the irony. The moment you stop needing them to validate your worth is often the moment they start waking up to what they've lost. Because people can sense when they've lost emotional power over you. And that shift, it unsettles them. Suddenly, the person who used to bend is standing tall. The one who once overfunctioned is calm, collected, and unavailable for chaos. And they feel that absence, not just in your words, but in your energy. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you no longer care. It means you've stopped abandoning yourself to care for someone who won't meet you halfway. It means you love yourself enough to protect your peace. And when someone sees that you're no longer emotionally tethered to their behavior, they're faced with a choice. Rise to your level or stay behind. Either way, you win, because you've chosen yourself. And that is the highest form of power you can ever claim. When you hold your peace and choose silence in moments when you might otherwise react, you're not just avoiding conflict. You're reclaiming your power. The ability to say nothing is one of the most underrated forms of strength in relationships. It's a deliberate choice to not engage in drama, not to fuel unnecessary arguments, and not to waste your emotional energy on someone who may not deserve it. This quiet strength sends a clear message. Your peace matters more than proving a point. Choosing silence is about creating a pause in the emotional whirlwind. When emotions run high, words can be weapons. They can escalate misunderstandings and cause damage that's hard to repair. But when you stay silent, you're giving yourself time and space to process what's really happening inside you. Instead of reacting impulsively, you observe, reflect, and decide the best course of action from a calm, centered place. This kind of self-control is not weakness, it's mastery. In relationships, People often expect immediate responses, an explanation, a defense, or an emotional reaction. But when you withhold those responses, it forces them to face their own behavior without the distraction of your reaction. It creates a mirror where they see the consequences of their actions more clearly. And that silence, rather than silence born out of anger or spite, can be profoundly disarming. The power of silence is also in its mystery. When you don't explain yourself, when you don't justify your feelings or decisions, you become less predictable, and that unpredictability commands respect. It stops the cycle of over-explaining and over-apologizing that can drain your energy and lower your self-esteem. Instead, your silence speaks volumes. It says, I'm secure enough in myself that I don't need to justify my boundaries or feelings to anyone. Moreover, silence protects your emotional well-being. It prevents you from getting caught in toxic back and forths that often lead nowhere but exhaustion. By choosing to say nothing at certain moments, you're drawing a line in the sand. You're protecting your mental space and refusing to be pulled into unnecessary drama or manipulation. That's an act of self-love and self-respect. But silence isn't about avoiding issues forever. It's about choosing when to engage and when to protect yourself. Sometimes not saying anything is the most powerful response because it allows things to settle, time to reveal truths, and both parties to gain perspective. And if after that silence someone truly values you, they will come forward with respect and clarity. If not, their absence or continued behavior will confirm what your silence already told you. In the end, saying nothing is a way of controlling your own narrative. It's refusing to give your power away to anyone else's drama or confusion. It's a reminder that your peace is the priority, and that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is the one you don't speak at all. In the journey of relationships, the choice to say nothing is not about silence out of weakness, but silence born from strength, clarity, and self-respect. When you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop reacting to someone who doesn't value you, you reclaim your power and create space for truth to reveal itself. Your quiet withdrawal is a profound message, one that often resonates louder than words ever could. It forces reflection, ignites regret in those who took you for granted, and protects your peace above all else. By mastering the art of silence, you stop being emotionally tethered to someone else's inconsistency and begin to center yourself in your own worth. This silence is not empty, it is full of intention. It is a boundary, a statement, and a form of self-love that signals you will no longer settle for less than you deserve. And when you walk away with calm dignity, you leave behind a powerful lesson, that your presence was a gift and your absence will be a regret. Remember, the person who truly values you will notice your silence and be moved to show up differently, or they won't. Either way, you gain clarity, you gain peace, and most importantly, you gain yourself. So say nothing. Step back, hold your peace, and watch how in that stillness he will regret everything he lost by not valuing the person you so generously were. Because sometimes the loudest message you can send is the one you don't speak at all.